Hello and welcome to Trojan Talk. I'm your host, Darren Taylor. They'll be talking with Denny Abbott, a man responsible for big reforms in Alabama's court system, and I want to welcome you here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it, Darren.
And as I mentioned, you're responsible from reforms in Alabama's court system back in the 60s and 70s through a couple of federal lawsuits. Tell us a little about how that all came about.
Well, in 1969, I was the chief probation officer of the family court in Montgomery. And I'd heard a lot of complaints about treatment of children at a Mount Meigs industrial school. It was all black facility, all black staff, but I'd heard some pretty disturbing reports about how kids were beaten mercilessly, sexually abused, worked in the fields all day, had no rehabilitative programs. And I had made numerous complaints to the state about it. And they all came back unfounded, and kids were making it up. The truth was, nobody cared. There were black kids, nobody cared. So one day, 5 girls came into my office and told me about what had happened to them. They'd all been sexually abused. They'd all been beaten severely to the point had to go to the hospital for brain injuries and back injuries. And I went home and looked at my kids, and at first I'm thinking, why is this my fight? You know, there are hundreds of people that know about this. Why is this my fight? And I looked at my kids, and I knew why it was my fight, because I couldn't be the kind of parent that I wanted to be if I walked away from these other kids. And so we filed a suit in federal court against the state of Alabama. The United States Justice Department joined us in the suit. We won that case. I got suspended from my job, but it was worth it. I mean, we made major reforms at Mount Meigs. We integrated the facility, did away with the farming program, hired competent people to come in and run it, and brought in programs that made a difference. And
of course, these changes, and that wasn't the only suit that you filed. There was another you filed that helped out with the system as well, right?
There was one in 1972, and I'm still a probation officer. I got my job back through the threat of another lawsuit. I got my job back. And there was a kid in my facility who was 15, who escaped from Mount Meigs. And the record said he'd been there 5 years. And I knew that couldn't be true. You had to be 12 before you could be committed there. So I started looking into it and found out that his name was Emmett Player. He lived with his mother in Birmingham. He was 10 years old and his mother died. The authorities didn't know what to do with him. They couldn't find anybody to take him. So they put him in a police car, drove him to an institution for delinquent children, dropped him off, no court order, no judicial oversight, no nothing, and there he sat for 5 years. So I started trying to get him out, and I found out that the homes for dependent children in 1972 in Alabama were run primarily by church groups, by the Methodists, Presbyterians, Baptists, Sheriff's Boys Ranch. All had signed the Civil Rights Compliance Act of '64. All had casework assistance from the state. All had tax exempt status. Wouldn't take Emmett Player because he was black. So in '72, we filed a second federal court class action lawsuit on behalf of Emmett and all children like him. And we integrated all those facilities, got Emmett released to his aunt, who didn't know where he was, had not known where he'd been for 5 years. But for my part, then I got fired. And the Klan kept calling my house, threatening me, and shop owners quit waiting on me and my family, and neighbors stopped talking to us, and my kids were harassed. They were still little, and so it was, we had to borrow money against our life insurance policy. It was tough getting regular employment for almost a year.
And then, of course, all of this, these stories brought up in a book that you've written. Why did you choose to write this book and share these stories?
Really kind of for a little selfish reason, I guess. My wife told me, she said, look, your kids were so little, 6, 5, and 3, when this first happened, they don't remember what happened. And if for nothing else, if you just write a chronicle for them and your own grandchildren, which I now have 8, they deserve that. You need to do that. And so we set out writing the book for that purpose, but it's taken on a bigger issue for me now because I want to tell people that, look, everybody has a role and responsibility in protecting children. And I want to raise that consciousness in people's minds that when you have a chance to help someone who cannot help themselves, you have a moral obligation to do that. And so that's one of the messages that I try to tell people about.
And here's hoping that folks can get that message through the book and from hearing you speak. And I want to thank you for joining me here today, and good luck in sharing that message.
Good. Thank you so much for having me.